Randy Meisner was a key ingredient to that early Eagles sound, adding the high notes to such beautiful tracks like Take It to the Limit. Randy Meisner of the Eagles has passed away at age 77. A man who, as I said in my introduction, was an essential ingredient to that classic Eagles sound. But he provided those wonderful high harmony vocals. I think those first couple of Eagles albums are just absolutely stunning. Quite frankly, my favourite Eagles album is Desperado, believe it or not. The Cowboy album, I think, as Glenn Johns called it. Randy Meisner, of course, was born in Nebraska, and I think it was his early love of Motown which prompted him to pick up the bass guitar. And you can find some of those interesting bass runs and tones that he employs in the Eagles music, which set them apart from a lot of the kind of country rock that was being explored from the late 60s, very early 70s, especially on the Desperado album, the concept album. And speaking of his love of Motown, of course, when he was with the Dynamics, it's his recording of Sam Cooke's "You Send Me" with that band that is really worth checking out. Only about 500 copies pressed, so it's worth a few quid. He later formed a band called Soul Survivors, which eventually changed their name to Paw. I think it was in Don Felder's autobiography. He says it was quite an apt name because that's effectively what they became. But nevertheless, on these early records, I think the promise that was to come later was certainly apparent. Of course, at this time, he joins Poco in 1968 with, of course, Timothy B. Schmidt, who is, of course, now has taken his place in the Eagles. Poco at this time included Richie Furay, of course, from the wonderful, wonderful Buffalo Springfield. I've interviewed Richie Furay on this channel. Do check out that interview, it's fabulous. He was also a session musician. I think he played on the James Taylor album, Sweet Baby James. Another wonderful record that's definitely worth checking out. But of course we mainly know Randy Meisner from his career in the Eagles and his rather fraught relationship, I think, with Glenn Frey. Mind you, who didn't have a fraught relationship with Glenn Frey and Don Henley, especially during the Coke years. But he was more than just that voice or bass player for the Eagles. He co-wrote a lot of the songs on the first few albums. Take It to the Limit, of course, is the most famous example. It seems to be his signature tune. But it was up to the Hotel California tour, he began to suffer ill health, the effects of not only that, his relationship fraying. I think there was a famous bust-up, I think, with Glenn Frey over him refusing to sing Take It to the Limit that night. After the Eagles, of course, he released a couple of solo albums, Randy Meisner from 1978 and one more song from 1980. And he even continued touring throughout the 80s as Randy Meisner and the Silverados. But if we talk about his wonderful, warm bass tone to those early Eagles records, and especially that Poco debut album, and of course that voice of an angel, certainly, as I said at the beginning, contributes. It was one of the architects, I feel, for that early Eagles sound. The sound that was very much Bernie Ledden, of course, was very much part of that mix as well. I had the good fortune to see the Eagles with Bernie Ledden a few years ago. It was a fantastic concert. So Randy Meisner, wonderful bass player, wonderful singer, wonderful contribution to the narrative that is classic American rock music. He will be much missed.